Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're journeying into one of the most extreme environments on Earth, Death Valley, California.
But we're not just here for the scorching heat and breathtaking landscapes. We're here to unravel a mystery that has puzzled scientists and travelers for decades, the mystery of the sailing stones. Imagine this. You're walking across a vast, flat, dried-up lake bed known as Racetrack Playa. It's eerily quiet. The ground beneath your feet is a mosaic of cracked mud, and scattered across this immense, empty expanse are rocks, some weighing hundreds of pounds. But these aren't just any rocks. Behind them, you see long, distinct trails etched into the playa floor. It's as if these massive stones have been sliding across the desert on their own. No footprints, no signs of human or animal intervention. Just the rock and its mysterious track. How is this possible? For years, this question remained one of nature's greatest unsolved puzzles. The story of the sailing stones, or sliding rocks as they're also known, began to capture public imagination in the early 20th century. Prospectors and visitors to the remote Death Valley region would stumble upon these strange tracks. They'd see a rock sitting at the end of a long, grooved path, sometimes hundreds of feet long. The paths weren't always straight. Some curved, some zigzagged, and sometimes multiple rocks seemed to move in perfect parallel, like synchronized dancers. It was baffling. How could a 700-pound boulder seemingly waltz across a perfectly flat desert floor? Naturally, with such a bizarre phenomenon, theories began to fly. Early ideas ranged from the logical to the downright supernatural. Some people suggested strong winds were responsible, simply pushing the rocks across the slippery mud. This seemed plausible for smaller stones, but it couldn't explain how giant boulders were moving. Plus, wind alone wouldn't create the neat, defined tracks left behind. Others proposed more elaborate explanations. Maybe magnetic fields were at play, pulling the iron-rich rocks along unseen lines of force. Or perhaps it was a combination of factors, like dust devils, or even subtle seismic vibrations. Of course, there were also the more imaginative theories involving aliens or mischievous spirits of the desert. For a long time, these were all just guesses. The problem was, no one had ever actually seen the rocks move. It was a secret event, happening when no one was watching. This is what made the puzzle so compelling. It was a geological whodunit. Scientists were determined to crack the case, but it wasn't easy. The remote location and extreme conditions of Death Valley made long-term observation incredibly difficult. In the late 1940s, a pair of geologists, Jim McAllister and Alan Agnew, published the first scientific paper on the phenomenon. They meticulously mapped the rocks and their tracks, but they couldn't provide a definitive answer. They suspected a combination of strong winds and a wet, muddy surface was necessary, but they couldn't prove it. The mystery deepened. Then, in the late 1960s, another researcher named Robert Sharp decided to take a more systematic approach. He and his team embarked on a multi-year study called the Sailing Stone Project. They selected 30 rocks, gave them names like Karen, Nancy, and Irma, and placed them on the playa. Over the next 7 years, they carefully monitored their positions. And guess what? The rocks moved. Karen, a 700-pound behemoth, traveled the farthest. But still, they never caught them in the act. Sharp's team concluded that a rare combination of rain to wet the playa, followed by strong, sustained winds, was the most likely cause. It was a solid theory, but it was still just a theory. The how remained elusive. Specifically, how did the wind get enough grip on a heavy, flat-bottomed rock to overcome friction? For decades, this was the accepted explanation. Wind and water. But it still felt incomplete. There was a missing piece to the puzzle. And that piece, as it turns out, was ice. The idea that ice might be involved was entirely new. It had been proposed as early as the 1950s, but it was largely dismissed. It just seemed too improbable. Ice in Death Valley One of the hottest places on Earth? It sounded crazy. But some scientists kept the idea alive. They hypothesized that on rare winter nights, after a rainstorm, the thin layer of water on the playa could freeze into a sheet of ice. This sheet could then trap the rocks. Here's the theory they proposed. First, you need just the right amount of rain or melted snow to form a shallow pond on Racetrack Playa, just a few inches deep. This only happens every few years. Then, the conditions have to be perfect for that water to freeze. You need a clear, cold night where temperatures drop just below freezing. This creates a thin, window-pane layer of ice on the surface of the pond. This ice is strong enough to float, but thin enough to be easily broken. The next morning, as the sun comes up, the ice starts to melt and break apart into large, floating panels. Now, all you need is a light breeze, not a hurricane. Just a gentle wind of about 10 miles per hour. This breeze is enough to push the huge sheets of ice across the surface of the water. And any rocks that are frozen into these ice sheets are carried along for the ride. The rock itself isn't sliding on the mud. It's being pushed by a giant ice raft. The bottom of the rock then acts like a keel, gouging the soft mud below and carving the famous tracks. This explains why the tracks are so clear and why multiple rocks can move in parallel. They were all trapped in the same giant sheet of ice. It was a brilliant theory that explained all the oddities of the sailing stones. It explained the parallel tracks, the zigzags as the wind shifted, and how heavy rocks could be moved by light winds. But for years, it was still just a theory, proving it meant being in the right place at the right time, during an incredibly rare weather event. That moment finally came in the winter of 2013. A team of researchers, led by Ralph Lawrence from Johns Hopkins University and Richard Norris from the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, decided to try and catch the stones in the act once and for all. They installed a high-resolution weather station on the playa and, crucially, embedded 15 of their own rocks with GPS tracking units. Then they waited. For 2 years, nothing happened. The GPS-equipped rocks sat stubbornly still. The researchers were beginning to think they might never solve the mystery. But then, in December 2013, the perfect storm arrived. A combination of rain and snow left a shallow pond on the playa. The team knew this was their chance. They rushed to Death Valley. When they arrived, they found the playa covered in a layer of ice, about 1/4 of an inch thick. And then, as the sun warmed the ice and a light wind picked up, they saw it. For the first time in recorded history, humans witnessed the sailing stones move. Norris described it as the most exciting geological event he'd ever seen. The ice sheet began to break up, and vast panels, some hundreds of feet across, started to slowly drift across the pond, pushing the rocks in front of them. The movement was slow, almost imperceptible, only a few inches per second. You wouldn't notice it if you just glanced. But over several minutes, the rocks traveled hundreds of feet, leaving fresh tracks in the mud beneath the water. The GPS data confirmed their observations. The rocks had moved, and their movements matched the conditions predicted by the ice sheet hypothesis. It was a triumphant moment for science, solving a mystery that had endured for nearly a century. The final answer wasn't aliens or magnetic fields, but a delicate and beautiful dance of rain, ice, and wind. So the next time you see a picture of those lonely rocks and their long tracks on Racetrack Playa, you'll know the secret. You'll know that you're looking at the aftermath of a rare and magical event, a fleeting moment when one of the hottest places on Earth becomes cold enough to let its stones sail. It's a powerful reminder that our planet is full of hidden wonders, and sometimes the most extraordinary events happen when no one is looking. Thanks for joining me on this journey to Death Valley.
A superb and strange story, but it's been resolved. Watch for a few seconds as thin ice sheets push rocks on Racetrack Playa at dawn, time-lapse style.